A lot of you would have seen this video before, and it did disappear from the channel a little earlier today. Given that the audio was somewhere between horrific and intelligible, for reasons I was not aware during the compression, something just happened, I really don't know. I went out and I bought a Blue Yeti microphone. I'm hoping this change is a lot better for all of you, and you can hear me a lot better and listen to the nasally awfulness of my voice in perfect high definition. I will say that the next video, Russian Navy Sucks Part 3, which this video isn't re-upload is not replacing, you will still get it this weekend, touch wood, I can finish it on time. I do have a couple of essays that I have to work on. It will still have the old microphone, as will likely the Italy one, but it is boosted quite heavily and just a lot better in general, so it will be a lot more legible. Without further ado, let's get into the re-record. When you think about absolutely horrific airlines, you tend to think of a little discomfort, a seat harder than the resolve of a southern lost causer, a window that is slightly too low so your neck hurts, and a questionable in-flight entertainment system that edits out the best bits of every movie. Food's pretty good these days, sometimes, well not from Dubai, but that's just me rambling because I don't like Emirates very much. But imagine just for a second that instead of these mild discomforts, you genuinely had to worry if your plane was going to land. Well, land in one place with you alive at the end of it, that is. Behold the horror as we descend into the depths of Aeroflot, Russian International Airlines, and Russia's flag carrier. Before I start ragging on Aeroflot, I'm going to give a little PSA because somebody is going to reply saying, well, they're an old airline, so actually it makes sense for them to be crap and there to be incidents from their past. To this I raise you the flag carrier Qantas of Australia, the flying kangaroo. Exactly 0 jets have ever crashed with a big red kangaroo on them, the closest being an overshoot of a 747 that later returned to service. Qantas was founded in 1922, Aeroflot 1923. They have a comparable fleet size, so no, age is not a defence here for being shit. Qantas, in comparison to Aeroflot, makes national news when they lose somebody's bags. I'm not kidding, the national news lately about Qantas has been that they've lost bags. That's as bad as it gets, that and no one likes their CEO. Aeroflot wishes this was their biggest problem. So let's just do a play-by-play of some stats. 8,231. That is the amount of passengers who have died in Aeroflot crashes according to the aircraft crashes record, mostly during the Soviet era, and mostly on Soviet aircraft. To put this in a bit of perspective, that is about 5 times more than any other airline. From 1946 to 1989, the carrier was involved in 721 incidents. In 2013, AirlineRatings.com reported that 5 of 10 aircraft models involved in the highest number of fatal incidents were of the Soviet variety. From 1992 to 2020, the carrier was involved in 14 incidents. Then Uncle Vlad, being the mega genius that he is, decided to piss off the collective world by invading his neighbour and committing war crimes. 5 times more likely to die. 5 times. To put that in perspective, the Special Broadcasting Service, or SBS in Australia, released some statistics after MH370 vanished. And again, this is MH370, not MH17, so this has nothing to do with Russia in the slightest. The odds of dying as a plane passenger are 1 in 205,552 based on US census data. That is a pretty low chance of death. Now let's compare this to Aeroflot, when you add in the 5 times more likely to die bit. This spits out at 1 in 41,110.4. Aeroflot flies the A320 as its primary aircraft in its domestic fleet, so it's got a bit of a lower passenger size, and they're having to swap over to older Soviet models now for, well, obvious reasons. So the passenger sizes of their average aircraft is quite low. Ergo, that if, you will get to die on Aeroflot, the passenger size is lower, so odds are the more chance that the plane you're on is going to go into the ground. You're starting to get the picture here though. Let's look at some examples, newest to oldest. A 737 started squawking a mayday call while I was originally writing this. I haven't gone back and researched this since I'm re-recording this because I've been, doing other things with my life. So, give it a Google if you do want to look into it. There was another incident as well, including the fact that they now aren't using brakes to land in many cases. So I expect to see some 777s yeeting themselves off runways in future, but we'll see. Back to the main event. In 2021, Flight 1492, a Sukhoi Superjet 100 flying from Moscow to Murmansk, took off and shortly after takeoff suffered a lightning strike. Upon landing, the pilot hit the ground so hard that the gear collapsed and the aircraft burst into flames. 41 out of 78 died. The captain was sentenced to 6 years in a gulag, I mean colony settlement. They're not called gulags anymore, this is free Putin Russia. The colony settlements now, apparently. On the 3rd of June 2014, an Ilyushin 96 was damaged beyond economical repair in a fire likely caused by faulty wiring in the cockpit while parked at Sheremetyevo. Yeah, you can look that up. Moscow International Airport. On the 14th of September 2008, Aeroflot Flight 821, a Boeing 737 operated by Aeroflot Nord in a service agreement with Aeroflot as its subsidy, crashed on approach to Perm Airport due to pilot error. Pilot error being the fact that they tested his tissue later and it was, well, had alcohol in it. Fair bit. This is pretty common with Aeroflot. All 88 people on board, including 6 crew members and 82 passengers, were killed in the crash. On the 21st of September 2001, an Ilyushin 86 landed gear up at Dubai Airport due to pilot error. All 322 passengers and crew survived, but the aircraft was totally written off. The aircraft was operating a scheduled Moscow-Dubai service as Flight 521. There are a couple of other incidents in this period, but again, I don't have a lot of time to sit here and go through, for 5 hours straight, all the fuck-ups that Aeroflot makes. There are a couple of others, but in fairness to Aeroflot, these are weather-related. Never mind that other airlines tend to fly around a bad weather or avoid these situations, but not important. Don't worry about it. Just don't worry about it. It'll be fine. So the 90s. An era of pain for most Russians, unless you're an oligarch or a politician, in which case, woohoo, party time. Well, Aeroflot had quite possibly its most incompetent and absolutely just fucking stupid moments in the 1990s. 525 people would die in Aeroflot crashes in this decade, which is oddly impressive considering the low passenger numbers and dropping from having over 1,000 aircraft to, 100 due to the fall of the Soviet Union, so it's genuinely impressive that they got this high of a kill count. So in the interest of time, I will only cover the worst from this period, because quite honestly there are so many incidents that I could make an entire series of air crash investigations in its own right. I'm not even kidding, look up Aeroflot incidents, and then try not to get RSI scrolling down the Wikipedia page. Here we go. Aeroflot 593. Some of you have heard of this, or you saw it in the original video, or you watched the air crash investigations episode. This crash is just sad, and it's just fucking stupid. It's a complete doozy, and the summary for this crash is just insane to read. The fact that this exists is a travesty. So let's read that summary. Untrained miner in command of controls. How did this happen? Well, I'll tell you. Gather round. Flight 593 was flying from Moscow to Hong Kong, one of the few international routes operated by the airline in the swanky new Airbus A310. The A310 pilots in Russia at this time were given a certain level of privilege. Well, because the A310 had a fancy new livery, and it was good propaganda. Well, until this it was good propaganda, but But halfway into the flight, in the skies above Kemerovo Oblast, the captain allowed his 13-year-old daughter and 15-year-old son into the cockpit, and gave them each a chance at the controls. Yes, you heard that right, he let his teenage children fly an Airbus A310 with 75 people on it. When his son's turn came, he turned the control column ever so slightly, and the autopilot was switched off. The aircraft began banking, ever so slightly, and reducing in speed. This one I noticed until too late. The A310 stalled and dived straight into the ground, the captain struggling to get back into his seat the entire time. It's worth noting that the Airbus A310 was a smart enough aircraft to fix its stall itself. However, the pilot and the co-pilot were freaking out and turned all the systems off and hit a bunch of buttons that basically made this, it was going to happen. It was no stopping it at this point. Aeroflot, acting like a proper Russian business, initially denied that any children had been in the cockpit, and it wasn't until a magazine in Moscow called them out that they admitted to what had happened. And this is back before Putin, so freedom of the press is kind of still a thing in Russia. Don't worry, this would not happen today. You would just get a bullshit propaganda story. This is just pure incompetence, and like I said in the original recording, I don't really have anything more to say about this. 75 people died because of this fucking idiot of a man, and yes, I will call him a fucking idiot, because he killed 75 people by being an incompetent twat. It gets worse, though. That was the second worst crash for Aeroflot in the 90s. The second worst. On the 27th of August 1992, Tu-134 flight CCCP-65058 was completing a scheduled Donetsk-Ivano passenger service as flight 2808. It hit trees on approach to Ivano Airport in rain and mist and crashed. 84 people died. There are more like it, but like I said, the 90s was hell for Aeroflot passengers. It was just genuinely really bad. And Aeroflot was even worse during the 80s and earlier, during the so-called height of power of the Soviet Union. The thing about Aeroflot and Russian aircraft in general, and this applies to the Navy too, is the idea that near enough is good enough when it comes to maintenance. And this is just blankly not true. Time and time again, Russian aircraft have crashed in just perplexingly stupid ways due to poor maintenance, lack of training, mismanagement, or in one case, a pilot making a bet with his co-pilot and putting curtains over his windows to land on instruments. Yeah, that happened. Look that one up. The worst of all crashes, though, are the propaganda ones, and Aeroflot holds the cards here for the most dangerous airliner operated by any airline, and it was for good old propaganda reasons that it was used. The Tu-104. This absolute death machine was the brainchild of the propaganda-obsessed, vodka-fueled post-war Soviet Union. The British were light years ahead in the jet age compared to the rest of the world for a very short period of time during the 50s, with the Comet revolutionising air travel. However, following a particularly bad disaster with the Comet, it was grounded and removed from service while the design flaws were realised and fixed. You know, imagine that, grounding a plane to fix it. How very weak of the West. Having never-ending small dick syndrome, the Soviet government demanded they could also have a jet airliner, and the solution to this was to put a passenger cabin on what was a bomber airframe and keep most of the bits the same. This would go very well. The design required a drag chute, as runways simply weren't long enough because the plane had no reverse thrust or spoilers. Now granted, this was also at the beginning of the jet age when runways were shorter, but the Comet didn't have to have a parachute. Neither did the DC-8 or the 707. Pointing that out. It had nothing at all to do with the fact that the hodgepodge design tended to stall at very low speeds, so pilots were terrified to fly slowly or anything. Nothing to do with that at all. Pilots would also complain incessantly about heavy and clunky controls. Now, the plane was rather heavy due to this sudden design, and naturally the plane would find itself tilting up, because it was an old bomber design with a big tube for passengers, and the weight just wasn't where it was designed to be. This all being said, meant that the aircraft couldn't actually stop itself if it found itself in a sudden updraft. Do you see where this is going? The first 2 incidents of this plane randomly yeeting itself up to 44,000 feet and just falling back to Earth were promptly blamed on pilots. This is the Soviet Union. What did you expect? And then it happened again. And it kept happening. A lot. Did the Soviets remove it from service? No, why would they do that? Silly thing to do. The Soviets kept this plane in service, and more Tu-104s literally fell from the sky, and the pilots were blamed while revisions were secretly made. Between 1958 and 1981, 37 aircraft were written off with a hull loss rate of 18%, a total of 1,140 passengers and crew becoming fatalities of this little propaganda piece. Aeroflot was the main operator of this type, with Czechoslovak Airlines using it as well, and the majority of Aeroflot's disasters during this period can actually be attributed to this aircraft specifically. The 104 even became known as so dangerous by the public, there is a folk song about it.
Самолет за 5 минут вас в могилу довезет.
As time goes on, I expect we will see more and more incidents with this company, given that the moment they could, they swapped to Airbus and Boeing. Gee, I wonder why. And now they can't get new parts thanks to the invasion of Ukraine and sanctions. Fun fact, according to some sources, staff at Aeroflot have actually been told to stop reporting faults unless they are critical to avoid grounding. Now this will go well. Also, the airline is sending aircraft to Iran for maintenance, which, I mean, Iran still somehow uses voodoo to make the F-14 fly, so I guess it's not the worst place in the world to send it. But yeah, Aeroflot, just don't. Your loved ones will thank you for it. Given that this is a re-upload and I now have time to say a couple of things I normally wouldn't, I just want to thank you again for all being patient with me while I work out audio. It's not going to be perfect for a very long time, and I accept that I'm not the best at this at all, and I definitely never will be. The YouTubers like Animarchy and Laserpig, the Drakinifel, they are absolute kings in the audio game, and I hope to get half as good at it. But just thank you so much for everyone sticking around. I gave myself a goal of 10,000 subs and consistent views by April next year, and it looks like we're on track to actually hit that by September at this rate if this keeps going. So thank you all so much. for putting up with me. Please join the Discord, have a chat. I'm always in there. Well, always in there when the hours line up. I'm on the other side of the world to most of you, so, you know, is what it is. And thank you for watching the 1812 video that I plugged in the original upload. I will link it into this one as well. So, just again, thank you all so very much.